Hey guys, I bet you that you clicked on this video because you want to learn about a skid. I'm just going to get right to it. I'll be as short and concise as I possibly can, and we'll just get right into it. We're talking about the skid assembly as a whole. When people say the skid, this is what they mean. This whole thing is the skid, and there's generally only 4 bolts, or sometimes 3 if there's an axle in the front, or if there's an axle on the back. There's only going to be 2 bolts that hold these things in. If there's a axle on the front that goes all the way through the tunnel, or if there's an axle on the rear that goes all the way through the tunnel, there's only a few bolts holding these things in most of the time. So they're actually pretty easy to take out. I know it looks intimidating the first time you've ever done one, but it comes out as a complete assembly. Now that there are a few tricks to getting them out on some models, but these mountain skids, they come out pretty easy. This is a mountain skid out of a 2014 M8. Obviously it has some miles on it, but that's okay. We're gonna go over this one anyway. Some skids, like a trail skid, utility skid, and obviously an alpha skid, are going to be far different than this, but they all work pretty much the same way. So we'll just start at the front of this one and we'll go over the whole thing. All right, so the front of this skid, at the very front, which is over here, we'd have the driver sitting right over here. That's what drives the track. At the very tip of the skid, we have these slide rail end caps. Now these are pretty worn out. They should be replaced on this one. Basically what the slide rail end caps do is they're basically just a buffer to keep the track from ripping as it's guided onto the rails. These are worn out. That is a wear part, and it's something that should be checked every now and then. And where these slide rail end caps sit is the rails themselves. Now this is the main structure of the skid, is these rails. So this, from all the way to the back, all the way back up to the front, that's the rails. That's like the main frame of the skid. So you can get those in all sorts of different shapes and sizes depending on your track length, depending on the type of sled you have. That's like kind of the main frame of this entire skid assembly. And then sitting on these rails, we have what is called the high facts. You may hear them be called sliders. They're a wear part. So what those sliders do is act as a serviceable, replaceable part. So you're just wearing out some plastic as those wear, because you have track clips sliding across the plastic all the time. If it's well lubricated, they last a long time. This skid has 4,000 miles on it, and it's on the original sliders. And if you look down here, you can see that there's actually, on these sliders particularly, not all sliders have this, but on these Arctic Cat high facts, you can see that there's multiple different wear lines. So one wear line is kind of the first one. It's kind of like they're indicating that you need to change it. That's where, okay, time to start thinking about changing your high facts. The next line up is your basically metal on metal, so track clip on the rail itself. So they definitely need to be replaced at that point, or else you're going to risk damaging some track. And by the way, there's probably going to be 2 or 3 different terminologies for some of these parts. So you may hear them called different things. So in the very front here, we have the anti-stab kit, which is just a couple idler wheels on a single axle. They just help guide the track onto the rails a little better. So it just helps a little bit with that impact when you're going up a slope, or you're coming up to an approach, or you're going over something hard, or even just in the soft snow. It helps that track just guide onto the rails a little easier without the end caps jabbing into the track so hard. Right behind that, we have 2 bumpers, one on each side. What the bumpers do is they're actually like a hyperextension bumper here. So when this part goes down here, and we'll get to what this part is in a minute, when this part flexes, it can go as far down as to contact the rails. So that's what these bumpers are here for. They keep this front arm from contacting the rails entirely when you're at full suspension travel. Since we're here, when people are talking about the front arm, this part, this assembly here, that's the front arm. So when somebody says they're talking about their front arm or their front arm shock, that is this assembly here. The front arm mounts up to the tunnel. This is where they would mount in this. On some sleds, it's a solid axle. On this one, it isn't. There's 2 separate mounting points, but that's where it mounts to the tunnel, to the chassis itself. So the arm articulates with the front arm shock, which is right here. So this front arm shock, that's part of your suspension support right there, and that's mounted to another axle sitting behind these two idler wheels. Now going back a little bit, we have what is called limiter straps. So now these limiter straps can be adjusted. What the limiter straps do is they keep the arm and the rails from traveling too far apart from each other. So what they do is they just limit how far away that arm can get away from the rails themselves, because you don't want these rails just diving into the track. So they limit how far that there's travel there. If you tighten those straps up a little more, you can affect the suspension in a couple ways. So if you tighten those straps up, you actually pull down on the whole front of the sled, believe it or not, and you can actually affect the ski weight. That's what a lot of what this limiter strap is for, is that actually affects the weight on your skis. I have mine all the way out because I like a little bit of ski weight. I don't like ski weight on my sled, so I like to be able to pop up my front end. That's why mine are all the way loose. Going back a little bit here, we have our first set of idler wheels. Idler wheels help guide the track. They help keep a bunch of that weight from the track from wearing your slide rails out. Your slide rail strips, which are also called sliders. High fax is actually the official term for them. So it helps keep weight off those, and it helps them from wearing out so quickly. In newer models, they don't even have these, and I'm probably going to take these off. They don't actually even use these. There's Ice Age kits that don't even use the front idler wheels at all if you don't want to. They're just there to keep some of that weight off of the skid, off of the slide rail strips themselves, off of the high fax. Going back a little bit further on this mountain skid, we have the scratcher assembly. Basically what the scratchers do is they help keep the skid lubricated, and they can help keep your engine cool too. They're just spring-loaded pieces of metal. All I do is lift up on that, drop it down, and that's helping with the lubrication and the cooling of your snowmobile and your skid. When I'm going down the trail or up to my riding zone, I have those down pretty much the whole way to the zone, depending on the snow conditions. If you find you're overheating, dropping those scratchers, these ones you cannot back up with. There are scratchers that you can back up with. You will bend these ones if you back up with them, so you can break them that way, or if you're lucky, you can just take them off and bend them back. In the inside here, there's additional braces just to help with the structure of the skid itself. But going back to this kind of the main events, going back a little bit further here, here's your rear arm shock. Here's where you're going to have most of your adjustability. You can set different spring tension. In this case, it's a air shock, so you can set different air pressures depending on how you want your sled to ride. So that brings us up to these guide wheels here. They're just a set of idler guide wheels, because the track will come across up here and then back down to the wheels in the rear. And on this skid, and most skids, there are grease points on both the rear arms and the front arms, and you want to keep those greased, 2, even 3 times a year, depending on how much you're riding. Load them up with grease, because they are moving parts. As this skid articulates, as you go over bumps, as you go over drops, jumps, every time this skid's articulating, you have bushings inside these arms that are wearing. So you want to make sure that the grease, all the grease zerks here, are all getting their fair share of grease for sure. Again, we have a set of overload bumpers here. So if this sled were to go all the way down, if for some reason a joint broke, and that's this assembly here, this is the rear arm of the skid. So if that rear arm were to fail, which I've seen before, the whole thing can collapse and it'll ride on these bumpers, and it won't cause any track damage and it won't cause any rail damage. So we have some more articulation points back here, as well as these stoppers, which are sitting right in here, and they just help that arm, this articulation arm, from hyperextending. Another brace here in the back, and then we have our idler wheels, our utmost rear idler wheel assembly in the back. This one has the tri-hub, which I just replaced. There are many different types of idler wheels that go in the back here. This is just what Cat runs. Most of the time, the idler wheels are on the outside. If you're looking at a trail sled or a utility sled, those idler wheels are going to sit on the outside. This is a design for handling in the deep snow. So with those idler wheels back here, you have your track adjusters. So what these adjusters do is you push them in. So you'd screw it in. These ones are just sitting loose right now. So as you screw in on this, on this bolt here, it pushes this whole assembly back, and that is how you set your track tension and your track alignment, is with these adjuster bolts right here. And that's how you do it on this skid. There are different ways of doing that on different skids. Now, some skids are just running one shock and they could have torsion springs, or they could have 2 shocks and torsion springs. That's what Arctic Cat has done with this skid in particular. This one doesn't use any torsion springs at all. And it's like I said, skids are built 20 different ways. And even though they're built all those different ways, they all work the same way. Somewhat. I think I covered everything. That's your skid assembly. That's what's going on under your sled. If you've ever wondered, I'll say it again, not all skids are the same. They're not all built the same. Many are built differently. Some have articulation in the back. An alpha skid is completely different, obviously. There's T-motion arms in Skidoo skids. There's a lot of different variations on what can be happening here, but they all do the same thing. They all guide the track, and they're all your rear suspension assembly. This skid is the complete rear suspension assembly, and you can change how this suspension assembly functions and the way it handles by adjusting 4 or 5 different things here. Limiter straps, front arm shock tension, in this case rear arm shock, air pressure, often on your sled. When you mount them, there are 2 or 3 different mount holes up front. There's 2 or 3 different positions in the back, and they all change how that sled handles. That's about all I got for this video. It's a quick rundown video of a skid. Since we were doing the rear idler wheels anyway, I decided that this was a perfect time to do this skid video, which many people have been waiting for, and who knows, maybe it helps somebody out. That's all I got for this video. If you like videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel. We will be putting this skid back in the white M8 tomorrow, and we will be making sure that it's all good to go to Revelstoke. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope to see you on the mountain, and if not, I'll see you in the next video. Bye everybody.
Matt, are you stuck over there?
Yeah.
Are you stuck bad?
Not sure just yet.